I am joined today by Jason Lauer. Jason is an extremely talented engineer and engineering leader whose career spans industry giants, including IBM, Target, Red Hat, and currently the American Red Cross as a director of data engineering. Jason, thank you so much for being in my orbit and joining me today on Cupalo Conversations.
It's my pleasure, Lauren. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I want to talk to you about the impact of AI. Before we dive into that, though, walk me through your journey. How the heck did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, well, I started off, as you said, working for a large tech organization, IBM, and building solutions with data. That's been most of my career, really, has been like, okay, how can we use all this data that we're collecting as an organization and get smarter? And that's really what, data engineering, data science is all about, right? It's all this information that's out there. How do we collect it? How do we use it and feed it back into our business and just get a lot smarter with it? And so that's also the thing I've really enjoyed throughout my career is being able to see real business impacts and really just improve, the everyday life for both our customers and, the people that are doing the work, right? Because everyone wants to be more effective at their job. And so, yeah, and that took over the course of that, trying to achieve that mission, it really just took the direction of building platforms that enable this because platforms are a force multiplier. It's like, hey, all this complexity for a problem we want to solve, let's group it together, turn that into a platform, and then enable others to do that work, right? Like that's how I kind of think about it. And so you're taking things that others would have to do individually. Every team has to do something. Let's centralize that. Let's make that easy. Let's invest in that process, right? Build a platform around it. And then, you can do really cool things once you kind of take that mindset forward and you build these long-lived products out of that mindset. And that was kind of the journey as I got to Target. We're at this inflection point for Target's technology approach, which was really taking a step back and thinking of like, hey, technology isn't just a thing that we have to do, and pay for. It's a thing that we can really use to define our business. And it was a great time to be at Target because there were so many opportunities. There's so many, problem areas that just had a lot of low-hanging fruit. And I got to be a part of some great teams, building out some of these products as an engineer first, and kind of being an internal founder, building up a platform. First, we built a platform called Automation Portal, and it was all about enabling all these different teams that needed to automate different data integration tasks to provide them an easy to use place to do that, but also to collaborate with other teams because around that time, there wasn't a lot of open source options available. But even that there are now, I oftentimes find that the limitations are really where it comes to collaborating. Like, okay, we're a team building data pipelines, there's another team doing it. How do they work together effectively? How do you not just be in your own silo? So I feel like we solved that problem actually pretty well ahead of our time for some of the stuff that we built at Target. Yeah, so we built some pretty awesome platforms there. And my role was, as a leader, when I moved into leadership at Target, my role was to develop the data platforms and really build those out and make those work together. And so we had platforms that our team was working on in the areas of data integration, scheduling, and automation, that automation portal product that I was part of the team that founded. Analytics, so things like, think of it like an in-house Tableau or MicroStrategy product, but with massive scale that you could actually put like 400,000 unique users and have them all using this thing at the same time. So that was pretty cool. And things like data science platforms, building out a platform as a service for data scientists to be able to create new data science models, deploy those, run those in steady state mode, and then managing all the metadata. So like all these things are happening. Where do you find the data? What does it mean? So kind of like all the building blocks to make an effective data organization and help the business to understand and use data. That's kind of what my team was working on there. And then towards the end, kind of like wiring those things together instead of just all these distinct platforms. How do they all work together and have awareness of each other? So that was a pretty cool journey to kind of like be a part of that from, like an internal founder, then moving into a leadership role and then working with all these great teams to build that type of a solution.
I've heard you say this before about AI, that it's a force multiplier. I would love to dive into what that really means and who's impacted by that.
Yeah. So AI, and when we're saying AI, I'm thinking of LLMs, right? Like these things that started off as chatbots, And it's really evolved into reasoning, intelligence, the ability to summarize vast amounts of information and just get like knowledge out of these things. I use AI every day. Like, like I think a lot of people are now using it instead of search, right? Because like the canonical Google search is like, I have a question. And then I want to find a website that has an answer. And Google got really good at like actually just summarizing what the website says. But now you can just get your question answered by an expert who's read all of the documentation, or maybe an expert on these different research papers, right? And can aggregate all that information. So it's super powerful. In like when it comes to the task of building good software, I think we're finding more and more use cases where it can really just speed up the process. And how, as you said, how I think of it as a force multiplier. So say you have a really great idea, but you're just kind of missing the execution or the next step, right? You can have a conversation with an AI and kind of get to that much quicker than you used to be able to. Maybe you'd Google something, you'd look for a Stack Overflow article, you try to, like aggregate that information, make a decision. Now that's so much quicker. But then it's also things like writing code. So these AIs are really good at writing code. And so all that like boilerplate stuff where it's like, hey, I have an idea. Now I just need to fan out that idea to, a team of developers and have them iterate on the problem. Like that part of software development, I feel like can be, rapidly accelerated. Right. And so, how I think about it is, like the most valuable developers from my experience to work with, they're the people who really understand the business problems they're solving. They have new ideas. How can we do this thing better? They're constantly trying to improve the system. They're trying to solve like real business problems, right? And they're leveraging their expertise and their technical background to drive to those solutions. AI is a huge help for that, that type of developer. Like the 10x developer can be, the 20x developer or the 30x developer with AI, because those things that what you need to do, you just need to do it. Like AI massively accelerates that, right? You can ask it to write the code, you can ask it to write the unit tests. So that type of stuff, I feel like, if you're one of those developers, it's a huge benefit, right? But if you're one of those folks who's like, I don't really understand the problems I'm solving, just tell me what to do. Tell me the code to write. I just write code, just tell me what to do. I think it's a challenge to those developers, right? They need to be able to get to that next level up of value of being able to understand the business problem, because that role, like I think over time that role is going to diminish, right? It's going to be, hey, AI can just do these things because the AI doesn't know the problem to solve, but it can even think about that stuff, right? If you ask it the right questions. So now if it's like, hey, I know what I need to do and I just need to go execute, and it's really clear, those are the types of tasks that I think become a lot easier with AI, right? And that's where it's a force multiplier. The good news is, hey, if you have a skills gap as an engineer, AI can help you too, right? Because now you can go talk to an expert, anytime you want, basically for free, and learn anything. So it's also an amazing advantage, to use it. So I don't think AI is going to replace the humans, but at least not in the near term future I see. It's more like the humans using the AI will replace the humans, not using AI. And so it's just a tool. But I think if you're a leader in software, and maybe I'm biased because I am, I think it's a huge benefit, right? Because you probably are in that role because you know a thing or two about what you're trying to build and how to solve those types of problems. And so that's where it can be a huge force multiplier.
Some of the skills that I see being in short supply are those around communication, around, you said problem solving, and really getting behind the business problem. How would AI help somebody become a great communicator? I mean, truly, let's focus on that skill first, where they know how to ask great questions, how to listen, how to interpret, how to get at the question behind the question, really figuring out what's there to solve. So I'd love to focus on the communication piece. How does AI help with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I haven't thought a whole lot about that particular area, but I do think when it comes to communication, there's no replacement for practice, and so if I'm talking to my team or giving advice to those folks I work with, how to improve their communication. It's oftentimes things like, hey, let's find opportunities to put you a little bit out of your comfort zone and give you the opportunity to practice those skills. Because it's one of those things where it's like, it's the difference between like knowing what you have to do in your tennis swing and being able to do it. It's the muscle memory, right? And that just comes with experience. I don't think you can read about that and do that, right? It's more like you have to be in those situations. You have to have that experience. And I think a lot of it's also too just like the comfort level, right? To be able to be there and be comfortable doing it. And that just comes with, from my own experience, exposure, right? Like do the uncomfortable thing over and over until it just becomes easier to do. But that said, I do think there are resources and ways to use AI to get better at this. I think it, like a lot of things, it's kind of in how you ask the questions. And, I'll relate it to like coding. You could ask ChatGPT, hey, just write this code for me, right? And you could just copy paste that into your overall software project. But if you don't understand it, that could be a huge problem, right? So you don't want to just like blindly follow what it's giving you. You need to understand it. And so you should be asking these questions of the things you don't understand and have it explain itself. Why did you do this? And it's really good at that, right? So that's like one of the biggest boons with using this tech is that it's an interactive conversation. It's not just like one and done, read what's there and try and understand it. You can ask those follow-up questions. And so oftentimes, if I have like an email communication or something I want to send out, right? I don't tell ChatGPT to write it for me. What I do is say like, hey, here's my thoughts. Here's kind of what I wanted to communicate. Help me simplify this. Can you make the message clear and help me simplify it? And it'll put a suggestion, right? And maybe you take that or maybe you modify it a bit. But then you could ask, hey, why did you organize it like this? What were your thoughts, right? And so that's where I think there's learning opportunities when you're having this. It's not just like what's the output, but how did it get there? And the same thing applies with coding, right? Hey, I saw you did this. Can you explain this part of the solution for me? And maybe it's actually like a great solution. You just don't understand it, or maybe it's actually a problem and you need to dive in because that part won't work for you. So yeah, I that's kind of how I would approach it. Is like embrace that interactive process. Don't just take the outputs and do, but learn from the interaction.
Writing an email, writing it well, is very hard. Do you think that there's a risk that it's like we're outsourcing the workout? Our bicep won't grow unless we do the bicep curl. That's a struggle and there's pain there. Do you think we're missing a growth opportunity?
Yeah, I do think there's risks there, and I think it goes to your attitude to how you're using these tools, where you really shouldn't, to your example, just say, hey, write this thing for me and let me send it, because that's not you, right? You want to put your personal touches on it. And so I think for everyone, the question is, what are they trying to achieve? Hey, if you're trying to craft a authentic email communication that comes from the heart, yeah, I think you're probably doing the right thing, but the difference might be like, hey, if you're just trying to communicate to 300 people about this change in policy, it's probably okay to let ChatGPT write more of it, or do like write it in a clear way. And then to your question, like, how does that, diminish our own, muscle for doing those things? I do think that's a risk. And so in my own mind, how you mitigate that is it's like not just doing the thing and then sending it, but reading, understanding, analyzing why did it do these things. Those are, the opportunities to still engage those muscles, and think about that and use it more as like a tool, not as just like a complete solution, right? It's a tool to help you get there. I do think, from my own like struggles with writing, a lot of it's just kind of like, where do I start? Right. And so that's where I oftentimes find the biggest benefit working with these tools is just get me a starting point, and unblock that writer's block. And I find that super helpful for me.
Yeah. Well, that's an excellent point. I think it's knowing, like you said, there's a discernment process of knowing this is the moment where I need to go through the pain of doing it on my own, or this is just an email about a policy change. I can bang this out real quick and it can be fine. It doesn't need to have a lot of my authentic voice come through. That does take that kind of discernment. What about the engineer, and this frequently happens, who calls me and says, Lauren, I'm terrified. I feel like AI is going to take my job. Why bother staying in this craft? You've already touched on a number of points as to why it could be for the 10x engineer, the one who's willing to go through this kind of new marketplace demand, why it could be very fruitful actually of an endeavor. But just getting that panic stricken call, I'd love to know, how would you answer that?
Yeah, I would first of all just say, like, do you love what you do or not? That's probably the starting point. If you're really not liking it, then maybe it's not for you. I love engineering. It's a joy for me. And so my advice to an engineer there is to, like, if they're not using these tools, find ways to start incorporating it into their everyday. Because I do think there's, if you like doing this stuff, it's really fun to use, and it helps you learn a lot, and so I'll give you one example for myself. I'm a Java dev by trade, most of my career writing Java, SQL, JavaScript, other things, right? Like, I've done full stack development, building UIs and services and database solutions. And I had never really worked as a Python developer, though I had managed a team that we had Python built solutions at Target. Uh, and so I'd never done that before. But hey, when I came here to American Red Cross, we're all working in Python, and I wanted to contribute and get my hands a little dirty to understand what is it we're building, and be able to just participate in those discussions with more hands-on experience. And so I found it like super easy to learn, because now I have an expert in Python right next to me all day long. I can just ask questions to, like, hey, I'm trying to solve this problem. Oh, by the way, I'm a Java dev. Can you rewrite this code example in Java for me so I can better understand it? And it can do those things really well. And so it's just an amazing tool. And if you want to learn it, it's a great way to do it. So that would be my first advice: is just start using the tools and see if that maybe helps with that fear. Because I think the fear is really about, like, hey, I feel like I'm not able to add enough value, right? Because what these tools are doing is they're kind of moving the scale of what is the norm and output for a software engineer, and it should be getting higher now, because you have these tools available, and it can help you move a lot faster, right? And so if you're worried, like, hey, I'm falling behind, well, this is kind of the same worry we've all had our whole careers in software engineering. Is there's always new things to learn, right? There's always new tools, there's always new frameworks, there's always new libraries. AI is just kind of the same type of technology change. Granted, it's probably more disruptive than, like, iterative changes to, like, a library or a framework, right? But it's the same kind of thought process in my head. It's, you need to embrace the change and learn and see how you can use that, right, to deliver more value. And that's really the only solution, right? If you're worried about that, you need to try and do that.
What about for the leader? Where is the growth opportunity here for a leader in this way to leverage this tool, to leverage new tools, I guess, even in the leadership tool bucket?
Yeah, I think as a software engineering leader specifically, there's a lot of things that your team needs to do that can be accelerated by AI. One thing I'm really excited for is using AI for assistance during code reviews. It's kind of like, it's always the complaint on development teams, like, it takes too long to do peer reviews. It's one of those things, like, hey, there's too many meetings. Like, this feedback is always present. Like, and I oftentimes have already started using it, though there's many more integrated tools within things like GitLab or GitHub that can really just, you can open a pull request or merge request and just have the AI, like, start to chime in with ideas and things like, oh, there's a bug here, or have you thought about doing this, or you could break this code up in this way. And so, like, I think it just, having that as a resource really helps accelerate some of those things that development teams need to do and have been pain points in the past. Um, Rapidly prototyping ideas is another thing. So as an engineering leader, you're often trying to figure out, like, you're trying to get to where the puck is, right? Like, I expect it's going to be over here. How do we get ahead of that and formulate a strategy and maybe have an idea how we're going to solve that problem for when we get there? And in the agile world, you try some part of the problem, you learn from that, you repeat that, and that's the iteration cycle. And the most important things, right, are that you're trying things, you're learning, maybe you fail, maybe you succeed, you do more of the things that are good, try and do less of the things that are bad, right? But that iterative cycle is kind of the key concept. And I think AI can just really accelerate that, right? Because you can have a conversation with an expert who's aware of all the solutions in a space. Like, hey, I'm trying to do this thing, and we're trying to solve these problems. What are some of the things I should be thinking of or looking at, right? And so that I find super helpful to build a strategy, right? Like a technology strategy, and try and be thinking of those things ahead of time. And so oftentimes it's just like Friday afternoons, let's chat with an AI about these things, and try and figure out some of these questions and where should we go next. So I find that really helpful as a leader working on that strategy part, like trying to get in front of things. I think it makes it a lot easier. It helps you test ideas quicker. So I think that's one of the biggest benefits is, like helps you iterate on an idea faster, get to a plan that can work faster, and kind of test out a hypothesis using the expertise that you have available to you.
What about in everyday life? A lot of my audience are not software engineers. What would you be saying to them who maybe similarly have a fear and a curiosity?
I think the message is very similar, right? It's an amazing resource, and we oftentimes have questions all day long, and there's some effort involved to get the answer to that question. Maybe you have to Google it, right? So I think it lowers the friction to getting to the answers to your questions or understanding the things that you're trying to figure out. I think it can enhance your daily routine in a lot of ways. Like hey, these are the things I have in the kitchen. What should I make for dinner? Right? Like you could ask a question like that. So I also think for everyday people, we're going to eventually see an application of AI more of like having an agent who can act on your behalf, right? So like imagine you have a business, or maybe even in your house you want to instruct like your house AI to do certain things, right? Like think of like Star Trek, like talking to the computer. Hey, I'm going to go out for a while. Can you turn off all the lights and set the heat to this? And when I come back, I'm going to want to bake something. So can you preheat the oven? Or like, it's like something that you can use to, just enrich your life, make things better, right? And this idea of AI agents is to have AI enabled, bots out there, right, that are doing things on your behalf or representing you. So like maybe it's marketing, maybe it's developing leads, right? I think back to how businesses will use AI. If you're like a lot of businesses, kind of in the data world, they have people that are like aggregators of information, right? And then they make decisions. So that I think is going to be massively disruptive, because AI agents are going to be able to aggregate all this information and make really good decisions very quickly and very, very cheaply, right? So those types of roles I think are going to be disrupted. And it's not that there's not going to be any people in the loop, but there's going to be a lot less people in the loop. And maybe it's just like more of a leadership role at that point, because that aggregation part can really be automated away. But yeah, I think there's a lot of things in everyday life, but I think what it's really going to take is, kind of like this next iteration of real everyday products will be developed that use this technology, right? Right now, it's kind of like you could do these things, you could do it all yourself, right? But for this tech to really take off, it has to move from like that hype phase to being integrated in everyday useful products. And I think that'll happen, right? I think that's inevitable. Is you're already seeing it in things like your iPhone, right? It can automatically assemble a photo library and pick things it thinks you'll like. Everyday AI is going to be integrated into these consumer products, and that's where I think the everyday person is really going to see the biggest impact. It's things like your car is getting a lot smarter. Your house will get a lot smarter. some cars already drive themselves, for instance.
Right. Do you ever worry, because we've talked so much and I love your attitude. So let me not over contextualize too much, but first off, compliment to you. You have a tremendous positivity when you approach this. What about the negative side of it? I would love to hear more of what, if there's any concerns you have or anything you're seeing that would be on the negative side of the fence.
Yeah, I definitely think it can be used for negative things, for bad things. I think probably my biggest worry there is use in automated surveillance or like monitoring. Um, for instance, some governments like to have a very tight control over the types of things you can say, the types of things you can do. Can you protest in public? Hey, if you show your face here, who was involved in that protest, and that's the type of thing that AI can really, like, before it wasn't practical to monitor everyone all the time. You could have these policies, but there was always a way that people could kind of escape your reach because you just couldn't scale to monitoring billions of people. But yeah, that I think is a potential worry, is that in the wrong hands it can enable that mass survey, like it really can solve for that mass surveillance problem a lot more effectively than the current tech can. So things like watching videos and assigning identities to people that are walking around the street, being able to automatically detect dissent and censor it. AI can definitely do that, right? And I think you see governments like the CCP already employing some of these things, and that's scary. So yeah, I think just like any technology, it can be used for good and bad, right? Um, and so it probably will be used for both. But I do think overall, it's probably a massive upgrade for all of humanity, right? I kind of think of it like the invention of the printing press. Like, what did that do for humanity? Well, it made disseminating knowledge, human expertise and knowledge possible, much, much easier than it was before, right? Um, and so AI is kind of a similar, these AI systems are a similar type of invention where knowledge is even easier to aggregate and take advantage of, and expert knowledge and everything is at our fingertips now, right? And so that's pretty amazing. And I think it's going to disrupt a lot, right? Like, gosh, do you need to go to college, or do you just need to talk to an AI for a couple of years? Like you could imagine that it could massively disrupt education. um, and there's definitely things about going to college that are beneficial for a lot of people, right? Like meeting friends and getting out of the house and being independent, that I would definitely want my kids to experience that. But at the same time, some of the things and the costs are very prohibitive, right? So I think it can massively benefit in some of those areas. Like healthcare is another one, right? It's so gated. You got to, like, hey, I need a prescription. You got to go like into the office and talk to someone, maybe, or like at least have a phone call. Well, like some of these decisions we could just make quicker, faster, right, and cheaper. And so, yeah, I think like massive disruptions will occur there probably over the next decade. Yeah, regulations permitting, but there's I think people will demand these things over time. They'll see the benefits and then they'll start demanding it, right? And that's where governments will react. But yeah, the negatives, I think, in my mind, it's mostly about um, surveillance, right? And the surveillance state and privacy, lack of privacy, right? That having these AIs out there that can kind of like scan and understand what everyone's doing at the same time, being able to aggregate all that, on behalf of a government that wants to suppress freedoms. Yeah, I think that's a really big negative that I worry about. Um, and I guess there's also the worry out there about super intelligence and how that could be dangerous to humanity as well. I do think it's reasonable to worry about that, and for these technology companies that are working on that problem to really be cautious and careful about it. but at the same time, I'm not a huge fan of this idea of like, hey, we need to prevent certain math from being done, like banning math in laws or like certain computation levels, right? Like some of these regulations, like California's tried to put into place. It's like, hey, we're going to ban you to have a compute cluster over X, floating point operations. That I think is the wrong thing, right? Like that's just slowing down human progress. And it also impacts startups a lot more than it impacts these big tech companies that can figure all these things out, right? So we're like early in this game. We don't want to prevent all these amazing technology, disruptive technologies from being created. So I do worry that some of that regulatory approach is heavy-handed, but it's not unreasonable to worry about the Terminator, hypothesis, right? Like it's reasonable to be worried about that, because if you have a internet connected AI that can learn and adapt and grow, right? Like, yeah, that could be dangerous.
Yeah. Well, I just finished reading 1984 just yesterday. So, in terms of surveillance and
Yeah.
overreach, I'm very sensitive to that. There was a lot of vivid imagery, and not that artificial intelligence was a part of that, but you could substitute Big Brother in there very
Yeah.
easily.
What if Big Brother didn't need lots of people to watch TV screens, right? They just had AIs observing it all. You can totally do it. You just run it in the cloud, right? Now you can, scale your oppression to the whole population.
Yes.
So yeah, that's an example how it can be used for bad.
Yeah, scary stuff. I also wonder too, do you ever worry about that? We're taking some of the things that you can't quantify that are invaluable in a sense, and we're trying to sort of weed them out for the sake of progress or for productivity, for moving faster.
Yeah, I mean, I do, absolutely. And, you know, I think we just have to be honest about those things that we want, right? Like that we want to keep. There's no reason we can't still keep the college experience, right? But maybe that changes quite a bit. Maybe it's not like going to a lecture hall with 300 people and, a lecture, but it's more like, okay, here's your assigned AI prompts you need to do, right? I don't know. I'm just making this up, but yeah, co-locating around other talented individuals who are seeking education, I think still has value, right? Um, it's also networking, and we can't forget that we're human. So like we have to remember that. And when it comes to working remote, like this is also something that I have found. Like when you're fully remote, if you even just meet once a year in person, that is like a 2x improvement in your working relationship. So uh, I do uh, I do think it's really important to remember that we're still human, right? And that the things that we have evolved to need aren't going to go away just because the tech says they're not necessary. We're still going to need those things, right, to be happy, but also to be effective,
That's
and to be able to relate and understand each other. So yeah, I think I do worry about that, and I think it's up to us to prioritize those things that we still want to do. But hopefully it's an option, right? It's not like you can't do those things. It's like you can decide to do those things because you want to.
the overarching message I hear today is that there is incredible fruit to be gleaned from this vine, and we shouldn't miss the chance to learn. Not to say that there isn't fear with every change and every new adoption of something. There's fear, but keep marching forward and keep trying. And I really appreciate everything you shared today. As a business owner, as an individual, I now think, oh, I can ask this more of what I'm going to make for dinner later. I mean, there's definitely opportunities here, and not substituting a lot of the other really critical human components that you can't quite quantify or outsource.
Yeah, I think again we're living in an exciting time. It is like any knowledge that anything you could want to know, right, is accessible at your fingertips, even easier than watching a YouTube video or reading a knowledge based article. So, you know, oftentimes my kids have questions. I'm like, hey, do you know you can do this thing, right? Of course, when I give ChatGPT to my youngest, he just wants to have it make fart noises, right? So.
Your youngest and I have a lot in common.
Yep. Yep.
Oh, well, Jason, thank you. I truly mean this. Thank you for inspiring me to be a little braver in this new arena. I think a lot of others, not just people who are technical, but people like myself, have a trepidatious approach to it right now. It's still early on, but I don't want to miss the boat or get left behind. So thank you so much for joining me today on Cupalo Conversations and for all of the insights, the wisdom, the little bit of a tale of maybe concern, but ultimately a overwhelming note of optimism.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really fun chatting about this. It's an interesting topic. So yeah, appreciate it.